place is here. The time is now. And the journey into the shadows that we're about to watch could be our journey.
Before the first step was ever taken into the Twilight Zone, a man from Delhi, Louisiana, had already been walking through his own stories. Henry Earl Holliman was born on September 11, 1928.
I got $2.85, American money. $2.85, and I'm hungry.
His father passed away before he was born, and his mother, struggling to make ends meet, gave him up for adoption just a week later. He was taken in by Henry and Velma Holliman, an oil field worker and a waitress, who raised him with grit and love in the Ark-La-Tex region, that corner where Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas meet. From those humble beginnings, Holliman carried a toughness that never left him. After serving in the U.S. Navy, he pursued acting, first at the Pasadena Playhouse, then at UCLA, finding his voice not in fame, but in the quiet conviction that he could make people feel something real. October 2nd, 1959, The Twilight Zone premieres. America watches as a man named Mike Ferris walks alone down an empty street. That man was Earl Holliman, the very first traveler through Rod Serling's Strange New World. And though the streets were silent, Holliman's performance spoke volumes. Every flicker of fear, every nervous laugh, every moment of loneliness wasn't just acting. It was the echo of a generation learning to live with uncertainty. Long before Mike Ferris ever woke up in that deserted town, Holliman had already journeyed among the stars. In Forbidden Planet, 1956, he was the everyman, lighthearted, charming, a little mischievous, bringing humanity to a film otherwise filled with science and silence. He shared the screen with Anne Francis, Warren Stevens, and the unforgettable Robbie the Robot, all of whom would later find their own places within the Twilight Zone universe and its extended family of science fiction stories. Actors like James Gregory, James Best, Richard Conte, Lee Van Cleef, and John Hoyt all passed through those same shadowy corridors of speculative storytelling. They were faces of an era, familiar, haunting, timeless, crossing between the worlds of westerns, space adventures, and the uncanny. Holliman stood among them as both pioneer and peer.
Well, I didn't exactly wake up. I just found myself out on that road, walking.
In Where Is Everybody, Holliman stood completely alone, yet somehow he made millions feel seen.
This is an absolutely hysterical town, and I'm growing very fond of it.
His performance carried truth. Whether lost in space or lost in thought, he reminded us that science fiction wasn't about the future. It was about us. Forbidden Planet, directed by Fred M. Wilcox and produced by MGM, it was a landmark in cinematic design and storytelling, a pioneering vision of humanity's place among the stars. Set on the distant world of Altair 4, the film follows a starship crew who encounter the remnants of a vanished civilization, and their own inner fears made real by invisible forces. Holliman's role as Cook, the wisecracking crewman, brought warmth and humor to a story steeped in mystery and psychological tension. His down-to-earth presence grounded the film, reminding audiences that even amid futuristic wonders, humanity remains wonderfully, and often comically, flawed. In many ways, Forbidden Planet foreshadowed the themes that the Twilight Zone would later explore. Technology as a mirror for the human mind, and the haunting cost of curiosity. Visually, Forbidden Planet represented a quantum leap in special effects, using dazzling matte paintings, miniatures, and early electronic sound design to create a sense of wonder few films of the 1950s could match. Many of the techniques and materials developed for the film would later find new life on television, particularly in the Twilight Zone. MGM sound stages, miniature sets, and even certain props were repurposed during the series' production. Episodes like Death Ship, Third from the Sun, and the Rip Van Winkle caper drew from that same cinematic lineage, employing stark lighting, model spacecraft, and surreal landscapes to evoke isolation and cosmic unease. Both Forbidden Planet and the Twilight Zone shared a distinct aesthetic, sleek yet unsettling, futuristic yet deeply human, proving that imagination, not budget, was the true engine of creativity. The film also stands as one of the richest crossover connections to the Twilight Zone. Anne Francis, unforgettable as Altera Morbius, would later appear in The After Hours and Jess Bell, each exploring identity and transformation.
I'm a mannequin. That's what I am. I'm a mannequin.
Warren Stevens, who played Doc Ostrow, appeared in Dead Man's Shoes, another story of possession and the uneasy line between life and death. Robbie the Robot became a Twilight Zone regular, turning up in Uncle Simon and the Brain Center at Whipple's.
I would love a cup of hot chocolate.
Tonight's tale of oddness and obsolescence from the Twilight Zone.
Morgan Jones, seen as one of the crewmen, later appeared in Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up and The Parallel.
It may well be, old man. It may well be. We can't hold somebody on suspicion of being a monster. He identified himself as a Colonel Robert Gaines. He asked for re-entry data.
And James Best, another Forbidden Planet alumnus, appeared in Jess Bell, The Grave, and The Last Rites of Jeff Myrtlebank.
Do you trust in the Lord?
Yes.
Well, then hold his word in your hand. And his word will protect you. But I'll bet that you won't call on Pinto tonight. I hate lying to him, but I find that when something comes up, you gotta cope with it.
How'd you do that?
Do what?
Together, these connections form a constellation of talent that bridges the dawn of cinematic science fiction with the moral and metaphysical storytelling of the Twilight Zone. Forbidden Planet not only marked Holliman's place in film history, it foreshadowed the shared universe of actors, ideas, and imagination that would define a generation. As Holliman left the outer reaches of space for the shadows of film noir, he next appeared in The Big Combo, a very different kind of frontier where the battles were not cosmic, but human. The Big Combo, 1955. Before stepping into the eerie isolation of the Twilight Zone, Earl Holliman appeared in the hard-edged film noir, The Big Combo, directed by Joseph H. Lewis. In this shadow-drenched world of corruption and obsession, Holliman portrayed police officer Joe McClure, a man caught between duty and moral compromise. The film's stark chiaroscuro lighting and psychological tension echo many of the same visual and emotional elements that would later define the Twilight Zone. In The Big Combo, Holliman's character serves as both participant and observer, a role not unlike his later portrayal of the confused Air Force pilot in Where Is Everybody?
You see, that's what you are. You're what I had for dinner last night. You must be.
Both men confront environments that blur the line between reality and illusion, where loyalty and sanity are tested in equal measure. The quiet unease that Holliman brought to the noir streets of The Big Combo foreshadowed his capacity to embody the fragile human psyche, making his transition into Rod Serling's Twilight world feel almost inevitable. Seen through the lens of Beyond the Zone, The Big Combo stands as an early reflection of the same themes Serling would explore on television: identity, isolation, and the unseen forces that shape human destiny. The web of crossovers extends even further through The Big Combo's remarkable cast, several of whom would later find their way into the Twilight Zone's haunting dimension. Richard Conte, who played the ruthless gangster Mr. Brown, would step into the dreamlike terror of Perchance to Dream, portraying a man hunted by his own subconscious.
If I go to sleep, I'll go right back to the roller coaster. Maya will reach me. She'll push me.
Lee Van Cleef, already exuding his trademark quiet menace, appeared in The Grave, a chilling tale of guilt and superstition set against the bleak western frontier.
What's to keep you from going, let's say, to the edge of the graveyard, then coming back and telling us you've gone all the way?
John Hoyt, who gave The Big Combo a touch of urbane cynicism, brought that same gravitas to two memorable episodes: The Lateness of the Hour, where he played the patriarch of a house filled with androids.
I couldn't stand not having her here anymore. I just couldn't stand that.
And Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up, where paranoia and identity blurred beyond recognition.
We're beginning to colonize. My friends will be arriving very shortly.
Ted DeCorsia, another familiar figure from Hollywood's Shadowlands, appeared in both The 16mm Shrine and The Brain Center at Whipple's, each exploring the cost of obsession and the loss of humanity in the march of progress.
You may think you're still the #1 lady on the top of the heap, but you got it wrong.
I'm a man, and that makes me better than that hunk of metal, you hear me?
And finally, Jay Adler, the weary face of countless noir backrooms, resurfaced in The Jungle and later in He's Alive, episodes that captured the darker undercurrents of human fear and fanaticism.
Excuse me, mister. I ain't had nothing to eat for 2 days. I'd surely appreciate if you could help me out.
But I don't rent time. I just rent the hall.
As a side note, Jay Adler's connection to the Twilight Zone extended beyond his own appearances. His brother, Luther Adler, also stepped into Rod Serling's dimension of imagination, starring in the memorable Season 2 episode, The Man in the Bottle.
I'm Hitler. I'm in a bunker. It's the end of the war.
In that story, Adler portrayed a struggling antique dealer whose encounter with a wish-granting genie leads to unexpected consequences. A moral fable perfectly in tune with Serling's cautionary tales about greed and desire. Together, the Adler brothers represent a rare familial link within the Twilight Zone's universe, each leaving their own mark on stories that explored the price of ambition and the power of human choice. Together, these overlapping performances reveal how the Twilight Zone often drew from the same creative well as Hollywood's noir tradition. Actors who understood mood, ambiguity, and moral tension. For viewers, these crossovers form a kind of cinematic constellation, connecting one universe of shadows to another. As the series continues, that constellation widens, from the shadowy alleys of film noir to the rugged landscapes of the American West, where Earl Holliman would once again cross paths with familiar faces in The Sons of Katie Elder. The Sons of Katie Elder, 1965. A decade after The Big Combo, Earl Holliman traded the shadows of noir for the dust and grit of the American frontier in The Sons of Katie Elder. Starring alongside John Wayne and Dean Martin, Holliman portrayed Matt Elder, one of 4 brothers reunited in their Texas hometown after their mother's death. While the film stands as a classic of the Western genre, it also serves as another bridge in the ongoing crossover between Holliman's world and the Twilight Zone. The Sons of Katie Elder revisited familiar territory, men haunted by loss, driven by loyalty, and tested by moral uncertainty. The same human struggles that define so many of Rod Serling's stories. Holliman's steady, grounded presence gave emotional weight to the film's themes of family and redemption, much as his character in Where Is Everybody revealed the quiet resilience of the human spirit under pressure. Like the Twilight Zone, The Sons of Katie Elder also brought together an ensemble of familiar faces recognizable to fans of classic television. The film's rugged authenticity and moral clarity echoed the same cinematic storytelling that made the Twilight Zone timeless. stories less about the West or the stars, and more about the people who wander through them. From noir to science fiction to the open range, Holliman's filmography reveals a consistent thread. Ordinary men placed in extraordinary circumstances, confronting questions larger than themselves. In addition to Holliman's own appearance, the cast of The Sons of Katie Elder features several actors who crossed over into the Twilight Zone realm. James Gregory, who plays Morgan Hastings in the film, appeared in the Twilight Zone episodes Where Is Everybody? And The Passers-By.
What happened to him is that he cracked. I remember thinking they killed you. I remember thinking that you were dead.
Dennis Hopper, cast as Dave Hastings, turned up in the intense episode He's Alive.
Ernst, you're my father.
Paul Fix, who plays Sheriff Billy Wilson, appears in I Am the Night, Color Me Black.
I don't know if there'll ever be daylight again. Only God knows.
Percy Helton, with his unmistakable voice and quietly scene-stealing presence, also forms a notable link between this Western ensemble and the Twilight Zone. Helton appeared in 2 memorable episodes, Mute, where he contributed to the unsettling atmosphere of a community hiding dark secrets.
Head off. Can't talk, can't cry, can't do nothing.
And Mr. Garrity and the Graves, a tale of deception wrapped in small-town superstition.
My wife looked very pretty when she was buried. Couldn't we keep her that way?
5.
And Strother Martin, another familiar face from classic westerns, made a memorable appearance in the Twilight Zone story, The Grave.
But that if you ever come anyways close to his grave, he'll reach up and grab you.
These links reinforce the crossover theme, actors moving between genre worlds, bringing a subtle continuity of tone and presence from one universe into another. Moving from the windswept plains of the Elder Saga to the tense, legend-forging frontier of Tombstone, Holliman once again found himself surrounded by actors who would leave their own mark on the Twilight Zone. This shift not only broadens the landscape of crossover talent, but also highlights how fluidly these performers traveled between the grandeur of Hollywood westerns and the eerie moral terrains crafted by Rod Serling. Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1957. In Gunfight at the OK Corral, Earl Holliman found himself once again among familiar faces, both from his earlier noir work and from what would later become The Twilight Zone. Directed by John Sturges, the film paired Burt Lancaster as Wyatt Earp and Kirk Douglas as Doc Holliday, telling the legendary story of lawmen and outlaws whose personal codes blurred under the weight of duty and revenge. Holliman played Charlie Bassett, one of Earp's loyal deputies, a steady presence caught in the widening moral divide that runs beneath the film's surface. Though rooted in frontier legend, Gunfight at the OK Corral echoes the same timeless moral questions that define the Twilight Zone: justice versus vengeance, loyalty versus conscience, and the fragile line separating heroism from obsession. Holliman's calm reliability amid chaos reflects the quiet introspection he brought to Where Is Everybody? Men searching for purpose in worlds that seem to be spinning beyond their control. The film also deepens the web of crossovers connecting Holliman's career to the Twilight Zone. Ted DeCorsia, who had appeared alongside Holliman in The Big Combo, returned here as one of the Clanton gunmen. He later entered the Twilight Zone in The 16mm Shrine.
And any part you get at this studio won't have to go through an agent. We can set it up through the community chest because it'll be charity.
And The Brain Center at Whipple's.
There isn't a machine made that can beat a man.
Dennis Hopper, cast as Billy Clanton, would later take on one of the series' most disturbing roles in He's Alive.
It felt like I was immortal.
Mr. Volmer! We are immortal!
Martin Milner, appearing as James Earp, brought his understated realism to Mirror Image. While Lee Van Cleef, another of the film's gunmen, made his own eerie mark in the grave.
Pinto reached out and grabbed him. He was already scared half to death, and that finished him. His heart gave way, that's all.
Jack Elam also provides a brief crossover link, appearing memorably in Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up?
We don't know who she is. And this lemon sucker here, he's the most suspicious of the bunch.
Together, these overlapping roles blur the boundary between Hollywood's mythic Old West and the moral twilight of Rod Serling's imagination. In tracing these performances, we see the same themes echo across time: courage, consequence, and the uneasy cost of standing on the wrong side of destiny. As Holliman's filmography continued to expand, these connections only deepened. Many of his co-stars would reunite in the sweeping Texas epic, Giant, a film that bridged generations of actors whose paths would also lead through the Twilight Zone. Giant, 1956. In 1956, Earl Holliman joined one of the most ambitious productions of its time, Giant, directed by George Stevens. The sprawling Texas epic starred Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean in his final screen role. Holliman played Bob Dace, a supporting yet memorable presence in a story that traced the clash between old wealth and new ambition, prejudice and progress, tradition and change. Though far removed from the shadowy intimacy of Noir or the isolated tension of the Twilight Zone, Giant shared the same fascination with the passage of time, the cost of pride, and the quiet transformation of the human spirit. Holliman's understated performance contributed to the film's emotional realism, grounding its grandeur in the recognizable humanity of everyday struggle. Where Serling's characters might confront their reckoning in a single half hour, Giant stretched its confrontation across decades, showing that even vast landscapes can't escape the storms of conscience. The crossover threads in Giant are striking. Dennis Hopper, who had already shared the screen with Holliman in Gunfight at the OK Corral and the Sons of Katie Elder, appeared here as Geordie Benedict III, the son torn between two worlds, a theme echoed in his later Twilight Zone role in He's Alive. Rod Taylor, cast as Sir David Carfrey, would later deliver one of the series' most haunting performances in And When the Sky Was Opened.
Oh, Bill. This is weird. It's just plain weird.
Paul Fix, familiar from the Sons of Katie Elder, appeared in I Am the Night, Color Me Black.
You're right, Deputy. Justice is being served. On a platter with its tongue cut out, just like the carcass of any dead animal.
Alexander Scorby, another veteran of the film, was featured in The Last Flight.
Air Vice Marshal Alexander Mackay is at this moment en route to this base for a tour of inspection.
And Patricia Barry made her mark in the Twilight Zone's haunting episode, Miniature, adding yet another thread to this cinematic tapestry.
You're over 30 years old. And you're living exactly the way you did when you were 14.
Together, their combined appearances form one of the richest crossover connections in Earl Holliman's career, a vivid intersection of classic Hollywood and Serling's television imagination. Giant stands not only as a landmark of mid-century cinema, but as a meeting ground of performers who embodied the complexity of human experience on both sides of the twilight threshold. As decades passed, Holliman never faded into the background. Between 1974 and 1978, he found new fame on television as Lieutenant Bill Crowley in the hit police drama Policewoman, starring opposite Angie Dickinson, a series that introduced him to a whole new generation of viewers and cemented his status as a household name. He remained a working actor through the 1980s and 1990s, appearing in TV miniseries such as The Thornbirds, guesting on dramas like Murder, She Wrote, and even starring in the late 1990s sci-fi series Nightman. In doing so, Holliman proved that while the stories changed, from westerns and alien worlds to modern crime dramas, his gift for grounding even the strangest tales in human feeling remained constant.
Hey! Where is everybody?
Earl Holliman's career spanned nearly 5 decades and close to 100 film and television roles. But beyond the lights and the cameras, he gave his time to what he loved most: animals. For years, he served as president of Actors and Others for Animals, helping protect those who couldn't speak for themselves. Taken as a whole, Earl Holliman's career was never defined by a single role, a single genre, or even a single era. It was defined by presence, by showing up fully, whether the camera was close, the world was unfamiliar, or the moment demanded restraint. Over time, those moments accumulated, forming a body of work that feels less like a resume and more like a journey. Earl Holliman spent his life telling stories. Stories set in deserts, cities, distant planets, and sometimes the quiet spaces in between. His work connected him to generations of performers, many of whom crossed into the Twilight Zone, creating an unexpected web of shared roles and shared worlds. Those intersections remind us that Holliman's career was never a straight line. It was a journey with many doorways, each leading somewhere different, each leaving a mark. By the time of his passing in 2024 at age 96, he had built a body of work that felt both grounded and expansive, intimate and iconic. He wasn't simply a visitor to these worlds, he helped shape them. Today, when we watch his performances, whether in a gritty noir frame, a sweeping western horizon, or that lonely small town where the Twilight Zone begins, we see the same thing. A man who gave himself completely to every moment, every character, every story. Stories end, legacies don't. And Earl Holliman's is still very much alive, everywhere those worlds continue to meet.
Next time it'll be for real. So don't go away. We'll be up there in a little while.